Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Poema podcast. I am James Prescott, your host. Welcome back to the show. It's really great to be with you all again. And I'm delighted to welcome back a good friend of the show. He came on the show first, I think, back in 2017 when his first book came out. He is a very prolific author now. He's written so many books that I can't even count them and can't even name them all because there's so many. He's an excellent writer. He's also an ordained minister, and is studying a PhD, and has been a star on TikTok as well. And he's a good friend of mine, and it's great to have him back. Welcome, Brandan Robertson.
Thank you so much, James. It's always good to be back with you.
Yeah, it's been a while, but you continue to write books, and you continue to do such great advocacy for the LGBTQ community, and progressive Christianity, and reconciling those two things as well. And yeah, it's a real inspiration to me and to a lot of people.
Thank you so much. And likewise, I think what's so beautiful is that we live in this era where over the past decade, those of us around the world in this deconstruction space, in this queer space, like we've gotten to connect with each other. And I so appreciate the network and the friendships like I have with you that we get to have as we push forward this more beautiful and just world.
Absolutely. And as you know, and maybe I don't know, I think most people listen to this show now. I'm demisexual, so I'm on that's on the queer spectrum. And yeah, I'm in a heterosexual presenting marriage, but I'm demisexual, and so that label applies to me as well, and that's something that has been quite humbling for me because I started out kind of thinking that I don't deserve this label. I'm kind of heterosexual presenting, and I haven't suffered the same persecution that so many other people have, but at the same time, I have to. That is part of who I am, and that's a privilege. And so, reading your books and them actually thinking these apply to me as well, is quite powerful. So,
Well, thank you. And yeah, it's so good. I mean, just to say this next book, Queer and Christian, that we're talking about today, that's really the heart behind it, is that it's not just another book for the queer community, although it is written with that community in mind, but it's meant to help push people's boundaries on what the word queer means. And I've mentioned before that in the UK context, I recognize there's sensitivity around the word queer. It's not quite as used as it is in the United States, but for me, I chose the word queer both to identify and for this new book, Queer and Christian, because Bell Hooks defines queer as being at odds with everything that's against it. And I feel like so many of us, whether it's related to sexuality or gender, whether it's related to how we hold our faith, whether it's related to neurodivergence or so many other ways that we show up authentically in the world that does push against the forces that say we need to be a certain way, we need to conform. Queerness is bigger than sexuality and gender. It's a value that I really believe the Christian faith calls us to. And I think it's so necessary in this moment, especially in the United States, where there are so many forces pushing us back into conformity and kind of a regressive way of being in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, and and that brings us to the book. It's a new book, and it's called Queer and Christian. So tell us about how this book came about, and the full title of the book as well.
Yeah, the book is called Queer and Christian: Reclaiming the Bible, Our Faith, and Our Place at the Table. And those who might know my work will know that I've written a number of books on kind of LGBT and Christianity, and I didn't think I would ever write another book on the topic. But I got a new publisher, and I have a book that I'm going to write that I really do want to write. But my publisher said, before we publish this next book that I want to write, I would love to see you write something for an accessible audience, reconciling the Bible and sexuality. And so I kind of begrudgingly went into this writing process not wanting to hash all this out again because I've done it so often over the past 10 years. But as I started writing Queer and Christian, I discovered that this was a really important work for me because in it, I moved beyond the clobber passages, reconciling what the Bible says with LGBT identity, and instead really took on this lens of what does it mean for queer people to fully bring all of our queer self into Christian faith, into spirituality in general, And many will know, like, queer people have always had different kinds of relational configurations. Queer people's sexual ethics have been different. Queer people's way that we embody spirituality has been different. And I really took on that lens of queer being called to our authentic selves, pushing back against the forces that call us to put on masks and perform in certain ways. What does it mean for us as queer Christians to come fully authentic and reclaim the Bible and discover what I discovered in my PhD program, that there are actual queer characters throughout Scripture that we can relate to? What does it mean that we can take the Bible's grand narratives of liberation and apply that to our lives, and then apply that to our work in the world as we advocate not just for queer people, but for all people, for a more just and equal world? And so this book is really for queer Christians, but it's for anybody who feels like they've been forced to conform and are looking for a way to bring their full self into a progressive, inclusive Christian faith.
Yeah, it feels like a call to, like you say, to just be our authentic selves, whoever they are, and to know that that person belongs and is accepted and loved and welcome at, at God's table.
Yeah.
And like you say, that applies not just to sexuality and gender; it applies to, like you say, neurodiversity and other things. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
That's a really beautiful thing.
I think it applies to everyone, actually, like even straight people. And I've talked about this before I wrote this book, but we are all taught from a young age that there is a certain way we need to be in the world. Men are told that they need to like toy trucks and do sports, and like even all of that basic conditioning is so inauthentic for a lot of people, straight, cisgender people as well. And so I think the spiritual path Jesus embodied is a call to crucify those false images that we've had to put on and embody and be resurrected to our true selves, which might mean that you're a straight cisgender man who does things that are traditionally feminine or female based on your conditioning, or that you embrace your neurodivergence as not a disability, as some language kind of talks about it, but
Yeah,
as a gift. I think queerness is an invitation to that authentic living, as you said.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the neurodiversity is something again that applies to me. Being neurodivergent, autism, ADHD, and again, like living in a world and a system, in capitalism that is not designed for that to live healthily. Like where you kind of like you're trying to, you're forced to conform or to mask. In the case of neurodivergent people, especially neurodivergent women, but neurodivergent men as well. And yeah, absolutely, like that. The courage to claim your true self and live freely as your true self is yeah, it's not something I take for granted. It's not easy to do that.
Yeah.
And this kind of book, I think, I mean, for me, certainly, it felt like just that encouragement. Like, you can be yourself. You don't have to conform to
Yeah,
what everyone tells you you have to be. You can just be you,
totally.
and be safe and
Yeah.
belong. And yeah, we need that more than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, one of the things, what you're bringing to mind for me is in the third part of the book, I do this, it's a section called The Queer Saints of Scripture. And
Mm,
I really went in reflecting on some of the traditional characters that people have said maybe they're queer, and some that are not traditionally understood to be queer, but I think are based on the evidence. But one of the stories that is most profound that gets at queerness is a traditional story of Joseph and his, some people would know it as the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, but his coat of many colors.
yeah,
Um, and it's, if you actually read the text, it's such a profound story for queer people. It's a profound story for anybody who's felt excluded, because the story says that from the very beginning, there's this young man who is very different than all of his brothers, and his brothers constantly bully him and hate him and push him to the edge, and actually, in the story, want to kill him because of his difference. But his father recognizes that he's different and that it's not a bad thing, and so he gives him this traditionally women's garment. It's a jacket with
yeah,
many different colors,
mm,
and he wears it. And we're told that, like, when he puts it on, he runs about the fields and he has this sense of liberation. And yet, is constantly confronted by his brothers who are like, when you're living your authentic self, they're very afraid of it, and they think there's something wrong with it. And the beautiful arc of that story is that at the end of the day, yes, he experiences persecution and bullying and is pushed to the side. But Joseph leans into his true authentic self. And in the end, he triumphs. He's the one that his brothers end up bowing down to in the story at the end and is uplifted by God as this amazing leader of his people. And we have those narratives in our tradition. And it's so sad that I grew up as a queer person, not hearing that story told in that lens, when the
Yeah,
scripture does have these beautiful gifts for
yeah,
us.
and that's reading that story in that lens, and then like it, it makes so much more sense when you read it in that lens.
Yeah.
I mean, even the coat of many colors, the rainbow,
Yeah.
pride,
Yeah.
like it just makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Like, it could have been that was the first pride story, like, yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense as well. Like if Joseph was queer, it would make a lot of sense that his brothers wouldn't like him,
Yeah.
or like in a kind of patriarchal, male dominated, very masculine culture, like someone like that would be mocked and made fun of and bullied and
Yeah.
and insulted and things like that.
And
And
what I
then
really I love about the story is, because we don't get this a lot, the father is actually a great character in the story. And it's an image for parents of queer children, I think, because typically you'd expect the father to join in with the brother saying, "What is wrong with you acting like a girl?
yeah,
You're a man."
yeah,
Instead, the father recognizes the difference in Joseph and encourages it and says, actually says, "You're my favorite child," and gives him this woman's garment and says, "Be yourself." And like, again, parents of queer kids, if they understood that story in that lens, how many kids' lives could have been made so much better in Christian contexts if parents
yeah.
knew?
Well, you could say he was the first. He was trans
Yeah,
potentially, like,
ab-
and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, yeah, I mean that would be transformative if people started telling the story in that way. And that's just one example that you use. There's quite a few.
yeah,
What other just for the people who haven't read the book, like, is there like one or two others? Like, don't want to go through all of them, obviously, but just
yeah.
want to read the book. But like one or two other kind of prominent characters that maybe people wouldn't have expected to read those stories with a queer lens, but actually you've unpacked and explored in that way.
Yeah. I mean, the most provocative one in the book, and I'll give this away, is I end by talking about Jesus as a queer figure. And what I want to say at the top is that this is not me trying to be just some liberal queer person forcing the historical Jesus into categories that he couldn't have had. I actually think and I show in the book, there's a great deal of evidence that, at very least, Jesus was gender nonconforming in the way that he embodied his masculinity in the first century Jewish world.
Yeah.
Jesus is not your typical first century Jewish man. Um, and there are sources in the first and second century that mock Jesus. They actually call him a eunuch because he didn't get married and he didn't have sexual relationships with women, as far as we can tell. And people thought that was weird and thought that was queer. Um, but the other very interesting thing is that there's a lot of evidence in all four gospels. The only time Jesus ever says, "I love you" to someone is to a man, and it's to a man named Lazarus. And Lazarus is the person, and people will know that Jesus weeps at his tomb when he dies and raises him from the dead. Lazarus is also, there's a lot of biblical scholarship that suggests he's the disciple in the Gospel of John that is known as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And in the secret
Wow.
Gospel of Mark, which is a book that comes out in the second or third century, so it's not completely authentic, but it was used by some early Christians as authentic. Lazarus comes to Jesus under the cover of night, disrobes himself, and is naked at the feet of Jesus. And we're told that they spend the evening with each other, intimately studying the mysteries of the kingdom of God. I'm not trying to make that sexual innuendo. What I am saying is all of the gospel writers in our Bible and this other evidence suggests that Jesus and Lazarus had a very intimate, deep relationship. Whether it was homoerotic or romantic is kind of irrelevant. It You have a man like Jesus who is transgressing gender boundaries for his day. You have a man like Lazarus who's leaving everything behind, not marrying a woman either, and devoting himself to Jesus. And he's the only person in all of the Gospels that Jesus says, I love you to, and is referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loves. I use that story to say, not definitively again that Jesus was queer, but to say, what does it make you feel like when you hear me articulate this story? That's how I end the chapter. I say, pause. Think about how you're feeling when I suggest that Jesus may have been in a homoerotic relationship. And the point that I use that story for is to say, in every generation, people have created images of Jesus that they can relate to. If you go to Black churches, they have images of Black Jesuses. If you go to white churches, they have images of white Jesus. I don't necessarily think those things are bad, because I think all of us need to understand that God and all of God's diversity can relate to us and incarnate as us. And I think we have evidence in scripture that suggests Jesus can relate to queer people, and queer people can claim Jesus as a queer image. And I just want to invite people to meditate on that rather than make a firm case at the end of the chapter that Jesus was certainly queer.
Absolutely, and I think there's reading that, I wasn't surprised when he was when I read that that he was one of the examples that you were going to use, because I think there's plenty of evidence that that Jesus, gender identity, even like some people have questioned Jesus' gender identity, whether he was trans, or whether he was male or whatever, and there's certainly enough there, like, just that he doesn't conform to typical any kind of typical stereotypes, certainly in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because you're right, he doesn't marry, he doesn't have children, and and like, you would get married at a relatively young age at that time in history, and he doesn't do that. He's in his 30s and he's not married, and that itself is a statement. If he did have partners, male or female, they were not his like they weren't his married partners.
Yeah.
Which again would have been countercultural.
Sure.
So yeah, there's loads of evidence of that with Jesus, and again, that kind of, Jesus has always been the person in the Bible that in terms of whether it's Jesus or God, I've always related to Jesus more, because he was human, and because of all these things that I keep learning about him and his humanity. Like when you see his vulnerability in the garden, when you see like his when he's on the cross and he's crying out to God, like, where why have you forsaken me? All these kind of things, I relate to that. I relate to the desperation. I relate to like the grief and the trauma and the emotional hell that he went through.
Mm.
Because I've been through a lot of, not exactly the same, obviously, but
Yeah.
many of us have been through things like that, especially in today's world. And obviously, queer people have been through that a lot, with the oppression that we have experienced. And so Jesus is so relatable and relatable to queer people, and it's and what you say and what you've written in the book is really, really good, and like, it avoids that kind of I'm just saying this to because when somebody writes about Jesus and queerness, it's like there's all that temptation to, like, oh, I'm going to be controversial, I'm going to say Jesus was queer, and get loads of controversy, and you don't do that. And I fully expect that of you, because you're a person of integrity. So you tackle that with a lot of tenderness, I think.
Thank
Um,
you. And yeah,
um,
that is the point. I mean, to be honest, and I appreciate your point about integrity. And part of queerness that I've learned, and this is really something I've seen in my PhD studies of queer theology, is that there is a little bit of a trickster approach to being queer. Part of being queer is being subversive. And so I do try to do that with Jesus and some other characters, because the point is we're disrupting what people expect. And that is what I think is one of our biggest problems as humanity, is that we play by someone else's rules. And to be queer is to say, why? Why are we playing by someone else's rules? Whose rules are we playing by? And part of this whole book is questioning, like, why do we ascribe to orthodoxy? Why do we say that we can't wrestle with the Bible? Why can't the Bible be a book that is a conversation partner instead of the final word? And I do hope that, like, in the way I engage with the Bible, it liberates some people to say, I don't have to accept everything, or I can take my own perspective and change the way I've understood
Mm.
the story, because the Bible doesn't belong to anyone. It's all of our book, and we can all reclaim it. And there's so much power when we do that, rather than saying, oh, the conservatives have the Bible and their interpretation must be right. We can say, no, we can take back the Bible and make it as queer as we want it to be. And I think there's a lot of text that is already inherently queer within it.
Yeah, absolutely, there is, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I've struggled with reading the Bible a lot in recent years, and and this take on it has made me curious again. I think
Mm.
about the Bible and some of these stories that I grew up with and I've known my whole life, and it's like suddenly they've got a whole different perspective on them. Like the Joseph one, especially, like that's something I never would have considered. Uh, and that's a and that's a and but when as soon as you say it, it's like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
Like
Ah,
it just makes so much sense. So yeah, I think that's a really, really valuable resource for people. Uh, one of the other things you do in the book is you tell a lot of your own story,
mm,
and you're very honest and very courageous in sharing a lot of that. I mean, I knew some of that because I knew you for part of that story, but certainly the your experiences of being excluded, being thrown out of evangelicalism, and kind of the way you were treated by some people. It's not easy to read, and it must have been quite challenging to kind of retell that story as well. Like I'm sure. So, but but again, it's kind of this. Uh, I'm not just talking to you as somebody who hasn't been through this. I have been through this myself, and that's powerful.
yeah.
So, how difficult was it for you to tell your story again? 'Cause
Yeah.
obviously, you've told it before. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the temptation for all of us who are in a public space, doing this kind of work in any capacity. We get so used to telling our stories. I'm doing 40 podcasts for this book, so I'm telling the story over and over again. And the thing that I'm always conscious of is that I don't want it to just become lines that I've rehearsed. And this book, when I did decide to tell my story, I told parts of it that I've never told before. I unearthed some of the scariest and most traumatic parts of my story, especially in college. Um, because the other thing I've learned is that all theology is contextual. If you don't know the story and the context of the person who's telling a theology, then you won't understand the theology and how they got there. And so, yes, it was difficult. My story writing on this part of it was like, do I really want to repeat all of this again? Part of it was, do I want to tell these pieces of the story that are really vulnerable? And like, I talk about like the first time I have a sexual experience. I
Mm.
didn't ever want to put that out into the world, but it felt like that was a sacrifice worth making to tell that part of my story, because I know that there are thousands of other queer people that had the same kind of experience. And I think this is the first book where I've been ordained in a mainline denomination. So I carry this kind of status of reverend in an official denomination before I was ordained by an independent church. And so for me, I wrote this book thinking, if I was a young queer person who was picking up a book by a pastor, what would I want to hear? And I think one of the things I wanted to share was that I'm an authentic, broken person who's struggled and had to overcome lots of hardships, and
Mm.
that healing is possible. And yeah, so I say all of that just to say I wrote my story in this book with as much authenticity as I could, with a lot of therapy helping me relive some of the accounts as I was writing them. And I
Mm.
do hope that kind of bearing my soul and sharing some of the not so cleaned up parts of my story will help people see that if this queer Christian pastor can make it through all of this, I can make it through it as well. I can overcome the shame of evangelicalism and this fear of homophobia or transphobia. Um, that's the goal.
Yeah, and I think it does add to the authenticity of the whole book. Like the parts we talk the parts we've talked about with the Bible become more powerful, I think, because you've already told your story. You've already shared with people your experiences and how traumatic they were and how difficult they were, and yeah, it's not easy to read, and I mean that as a compliment, in the sense that it's very honest and it's very, it's very moving at times as well, and just yeah, and yeah, and somebody obviously who's known you for a while, and yeah, it was quite moving for me to read all of that, and I mean, I've always thought you were a very courageous person, and this book just kind of reaffirmed that for me. Everything you do is very courageous. Like the advocacy that you do is very important. But you're on the front line. I mean, that TikTok stuff that you did was very much on the front line. And there was a lot of pushback with some of those videos, wasn't there? Like that must have been quite challenging itself when you were doing that and getting that feedback in your face like a lot of the time.
Yeah. I mean, what's actually very interesting is that in 2 hours, I'm doing a podcast with a notorious anti-LGBT conservative. It's a 3 hour long live debate. And so I've been spending my day both receiving lots of hate comments already on like Twitter from this audience. And it does, in these moments, I find myself going in and wondering, why am I doing this? What is the benefit? Because I don't think it's good for most people to put themselves in a space where you have some very anti-LGBT or very right-wing people that are going to try to tear you down. But I do feel like I have a unique calling to. I've processed a lot of my religious trauma. I have been fortunate enough to be able to have access to resources like therapy and medication and like really to do the work to heal from a lot of my trauma so that I can go into the space with these people who are going to re-traumatize me in some ways, but to try to be a Christ-like presence. And that's really my only goal on TikTok or in any debate I do, is not to win. I don't think I can win a debate. I don't think arguments win debates. I don't think you convince anybody by a nicely worded argument. I think you convince people by showing up as a loving, generous presence. And that is an encouragement to everyone to say, like, even if you're not debating, even if you're not going back to your conservative church or your conservative family members, if you do want to see people's hearts and minds change, and I say this at the end of the book, actually, just share your light and love. Like, show up as your authentic self. Don't debate. Don't feel like you need to defend yourself. But your example, your light, that actually changes people's hearts and minds. That actually wins people to a more progressive, inclusive faith. And so that's why I do what I do. And it's not always easy. And I do have my own anxieties and issues afterwards. But it's also just a gift to hear the stories of people who have been transformed because they watched a debate or engaged with me negatively on TikTok. And I wasn't snarky and mean back to them, but I was empathic or tried to be as generous as I could be.
And some of them actually engaged in conversation in the comments. I saw that, and like you say, it was all love and respect and kindness. It wasn't, there wasn't any bitterness or resentment or anything like that. And that, you're right, that is an example, and it's not easy. And
And I don't always do it. I don't always do it. I am snarky and mean sometimes too. But
yeah, I mean, like, I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because we're human, and
yeah,
these things do get to us, and uh, and I know you'll have healthy boundaries, and you'll have people who you're accountable to, and who will support you, and you will be around for you after what you're doing. I mean, that's very courageous what you're doing, I have to say. And but you're right about, it's not about winning an argument, because you can't. Winning an intellectual argument isn't enough. It's not going to achieve anything. Like, because people can be articulate, and with even if they have bad arguments, they can just articulate bad arguments but sound convincing.
yeah,
It's and obviously the way of Jesus is not about winning the intellectual argument either. It's about loving people. There are, and yeah, I mean, when Jesus always responded with love and compassion, even to people that he didn't agree with,
yeah,
didn't like. Uh, uh, I mean, obviously we know about what happened in the temple, but generally Jesus is loving and compassionate to
Yeah.
and towards, even like we see when he's being tortured, when he's being executed, he's not snarky or rude or like disrespectful to the people that are doing it to him.
Yeah.
And he talks to the criminals that are next to him,
Yeah.
and responds again with love. And
I
yeah,
know
exactly. So
we learned this from our mutual friend, or I learned this from our mutual friend Rob Bell. But it's pointing out that almost never in any of the Gospels does Jesus actually engage in a theological point by point discussion. What he does when he's confronted with a theological question is he tells a story. And I think
yes,
that says everything. It's not about winning an argument, it's about contextualizing in real experience, telling the stories of people. And in my life, I've done hundreds of debates in the last 10 years, and I can't say that one person has ever said, your argument changed my mind. What I can say is that people have said, you were way kinder to those people than they were to you. And that makes me want to know more about what you're thinking and how you think about the world. Um,
mm,
and honestly, like it was Rob Bell and Brian McLaren when I was in college, who I was privileged to have conversations with. And it wasn't their arguments, it was that they were Christ like and kind to me and loving
yeah,
to me, that changed my
yeah,
heart and mind.
absolutely. And they're amazing people. I've hosted them both on this show and Rob multiple times, and yeah, they're a big part of my story as well. I mean, my own theological spiritual journey. So yeah, absolutely, in a different way to yours probably, but yeah, absolutely. They have modelled that love and that grace, and that lack of judgment
Yeah.
very well, and continue to. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the parables, like the parables are wonderful. Like you people will remember a story long after they remember any kind of intellectual argument. Like if you tell someone a good story, they will just remember that, and it will. I mean, the stories of Jesus like continue to move people in new and fresh ways all the time, and they have done for thousands of years, and that's why people remember them.
Yeah.
That people who don't even read the Bible regularly know a lot of those stories because they're powerful stories. And yeah, and they're right. That's how Jesus generally responds to questions. Either he responds with a question,
Yeah.
or he
Yeah.
responds with a story.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the
and
beautiful thing about both of those responses is that stories are up to interpretation and questions are up to your own response. Jesus is not looking for the right answer. He's looking for your answer. How do you understand this story? Um,
yeah,
and that's a different way of thinking about religion, frankly. It's not about the right answers. It's about seeking the truth, seeking God for yourself as yourself.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. If only the world was more like that.
Hmm.
How did writing this book change you? Like, because if you said at the beginning that you weren't originally planning to write this book, right? And but then now you're glad you have written it.
Yeah.
So, like, what did the? Because I'm always fascinated by how the creative process transforms people. Like, how did the creative process of this book change you and help you on your journey?
Yeah. I mean, this book did two things. One, I opened the book, and I've probably opened three or four of my books with the same Bible verse. I opened this book with "Perfect love casts out all fear,"
Mm,
and that's kind of more for me than it is for the reader, because that is the heart of my faith. It is whenever I'm experiencing fear, I know I'm not functioning in God, because God casts out all of our fear. And I was afraid writing this book. Um, because I put myself out there the most authentically. The chapter on sex, for instance, I deleted and rewrote that chapter probably 5 times because I wanted to be honest about what I actually believe about sex and sexual ethics, which is that premarital sex isn't a sin, that sexual exploration is okay, that non monogamy is not a problem if you're wired in that way. But I also knew that if I did that haphazardly, one, it could open myself up to some very uncomfortable critique that I might not be ready to handle because it obviously
yep.
gets very deep into my personal life. But also, I didn't want to lead people wrong. And I don't believe wrong is like God would be mad at me. But like, I don't want people to read something, think it's trustworthy, and then harm themselves because they engage in a behavior that's actually not good. So this book, I had to wrestle with my own fears. I had to talk to a lot of mentors and friends. I had to really be like, is this what I believe? Am I willing to stand by this in the world? And all that is to say, at the end of this book, and now that we have it coming out into the world, I do feel liberated because I'm out there now. Like, if somebody reads this book cover to cover, they're going to know who I am. And it's not conservative evangelical Brandan anymore. It's not Orthodox Brandan. It's a truly queer, subversive, boundary pushing person. Um, but I hope that is an invitation for other people to push their own boundaries and to share their own stories and to explore their own faith and their own ethics without being afraid. Um, and so I just feel like a more confident person on the other end of this book. And yeah, I'm honestly just really excited to see how people react and resonate because I am putting it all out there. So
Absolutely, you do. You very much do. It's probably the most honest book you've written, actually. And uh, yeah, I mean, has it affected your faith? Has it deepened your faith?
it's changed my faith a lot. And that's the next book that I'm writing. The book that I originally wanted to write is this exploration of, I've been using this word Christian agnostic for a few years now to describe how I see myself in the world. Um, and I want to explore that space a little bit more. It's not a leaving behind of Christianity, but it's seeing Christianity as way more expansive than a religion. And what does it mean to live life with the goal of living a meaningful life rather than appeasing God by living by the right rules and believing the right theology. And I think by
Mm,
the end of this book, I feel more confident that I don't need to worry about getting all my theology right. I don't need to worry about if I'm ethically wrong on a question. I trust that God will lead me to what is good and right in whatever journey that looks like. I'm interested in embracing that
mm.
agnostic space of let's all just try to live a meaningful and good life rather than trying to live the religiously correct life, which again, I think is what Jesus was up to. I don't think he was very interested in creating religious converts. Um,
Agreed. I don't think Jesus was here to start a religion.
yeah,
I think he was. I still believe this then. I still believe it now that Jesus, one of Jesus' primary motives was to show us how to be human, fully human, and our fully authentic selves.
yeah,
And that when that happens is when we feel our closest connection to God.
yeah, absolutely.
And I've certainly had struggles with the Christian God, and and that's because of trauma and spiritual abuse and a lot of other things. I've never had a problem with Jesus, and I feel closer to Jesus than ever, really, even though I'm not really part of a church at the moment, and that's part because of the same things that just talked about. Certainly, I have a close connection to Jesus and to his story and to his teachings still, and they still resonate as true for me, and they still resonate as divine for me. And and again, this book was really did a good job for me in terms of reawakening that a little bit and reawakening my curiosity about about Jesus and about some of the stories in the Bible, like I said, and I didn't think that was going to be possible. Anything could bring me back. So you
Well,
did a
thank you.
very good job. And you are, I mean, honestly, you are one of the best examples of a Christ-like life that I know in my own life. And
Well, and I
yeah,
do mean this. I'm not just saying it because you said that, but I also think the way you, from your very first book, and then the way that you embody yourself in the world, I think this is the beauty of this space that we get to live in is that you are so Christ-like and compassionate and also authentic and honest in the way that you share your story and show up in the world. And that's something I didn't get when I was a conservative evangelical. We pretended to be authentic, but to share our full, real, raw selves is something you do so beautifully, and it's healing and liberating for others. And I think this progressive deconstruction, whatever we want to call it, space really encourages authentic living and being vulnerable. And there's something deeply human, something deeply healing about that. And so thank you for embodying that as well.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Very, very kind. So when is this book out? Is it out already?
No, it comes out at the end of May, so we got a little while, but we're trying to get pre-orders in now. So if people are interested, they can go to queerchristian.org and pre-order their copy.
100%. And also it's on all the other spaces you can get books as well. Definitely do check it out. And then check out Brandon's other books as well, because there's a lot of great books that he's written. So, and I eagerly await your next book. If it's anything like what you're talking about, I'm very interested in that, because that sounds like resonant for me. So, yes, thanks, Brandon, for coming on. I appreciate it. And I'm sure this book is going to do really well and inspire a lot of people. And thank you for writing it. Thank you for coming on the show. And I really appreciate you and all you do. So thank you.
Likewise, and thank you so much for having me, James. It's always an honor.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll have you back definitely for sure. And thanks for listening, everyone.